to be effective at product management, you really have to work with everybody. The CTO is not motivated by the same thing as the CFO, and everybody's got opinions.
So today we're talking to Jim Dembkoski. He's a good friend of mine with 16 years of experience in product leadership.
In life sciences, I see a massive disconnect there between buyer and user.
He drives product innovation, strategic vision, and significant business growth in both startups and Fortune 500 companies.
You put all this effort in to kind of bring something to market to say, we're trying to make your lives better. But to actually do that is massive.
So with Jim today, we break down some product management basics. We look at what a product manager really does.
You're talking about taking a bunch of different personalities with different things that are intrinsically motivating them. And in product, I have to help create the Northstar, and secondly, have everybody agree to it.
How do you get everyone in the organization rowing in the same direction? And what are some of the keys to success as a product manager?
The challenge becomes your users, not always your buyer. In product, our job is like, here's what we need to do and why we need to do it. How? You turn to your technologists and say, I am ecstatic to find out how you plan on solving this one.
Welcome to LifeScience Continuum. Let's get to it. How'd you get into it? How'd you get into product management? Talk to me about that.
So I got into product management out of customer service. Everybody comes into product management differently. I fell kind of backwards into it. I wanted to be into it when I was in customer service, and you go up the ranks in customer service and you get a little bored if you're good, right? And you get to a point where you're like, boy, I'm taking the same phone call on the same thing that's broken day in, day out. Can I just go fix it? And that's how I realized, like, oh, there's this thing called product managers, and they're the ones who take all this information and they're like, why don't we fix the button that's broken, or we'll fix the workflow part that's busted. So I'm like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And I always used to say, when you're interviewing and you're young, I want to make the biggest impact I can. And in my mind, I'm like, well, that's the biggest impact I can make there.
Yeah.
I didn't get into product in that company. And then I ended up going to a startup company, and I was brought in to build out their customer service org, the professional services. And it was a great company. It was an AI company. We built a neural network to read financial data and then extrapolate it and do cool stuff with it. And it was at one point where we were like, okay, we've got to make some big changes in what our core product is to hit a new market segment, or we're done. We're kind of finishing out our Series B. We're not going to get a bridge or a Series C unless we can make some big jumps. So I was familiar enough with product management to say, I think we need a product manager. Why don't you let me do it? And they liked me at the time, and we had just cut the company in half because we're trying to make our runway last, and we were going in a new direction. We were down to about 22 people at that time. And I said, well, let me be your director of product management. And they said, okay.
How do you convince them of that, though? How do you just show up and say, let me do this job?
So I was super lucky in that the CEO, who was the head of sales, and they made him a CEO, he was a product manager for an old video game company, and he knew what they did. When you have a leader that understands the need for product, it's a smooth sail to get in. It really is. And he was like, yes, that makes complete and utter sense. Go get him. Now, I had to go onto Google and figure out, well, what does a product manager do on a day-to-day basis? What am I supposed to do here? I mean, you kind of know just by being in a startup company and you have your hands in everything. Product management is, to me, when they say you're the CEO of a product, CEO is usually your first product manager of any startup company. Right? And it's just like, I have to be able to manage all these things, and I have to build something, and I have the idea. That's what a CEO does. I have the idea for a product that we're going to build and get out. So whether they like it or not, they're the product manager. Not always great at it, nor do they have the time to do it. Hence, I need someone to just do nothing but focus on the actual product so that we're building the best thing we can possibly build to give value to the company and for our clients.
So talk about that just for a second. So the CEO or the founder has to get to a critical point where they say, okay, I need to hand this off to someone else. This is their baby. They need to hand that off to someone else. What are the mental hoops they have to jump through? What are the gates that they have to go through to get to that point and be ready to do that?
That's a huge challenge for CEOs that finally want to relinquish power is not a good way to put it, because they have to always be involved. So when I've talked to CEOs, especially in startups, when I come in, I said, look, I can come in and help you with product. I can come up and help with the vision. I'll do the heavy lifting, but you have to be involved. I mean, you were the original person. I don't have your brain. You need to be able to work with me. thing about product, and it's one of the reasons I really like it, to be effective at product management, you really have to work with everybody. Cross-functional is a huge buzzword. Collaborate's the second probably biggest buzzword. But to actually do that is massive. You're talking about taking a bunch of different personalities with different things that are intrinsically motivating them. The CTO is not motivated by the same thing as the CFO, and everybody's got opinions. Someone has to bring all that together. We have a North Star we all agree on. And in product, I have to help create the North Star, and secondly, have everybody agree to it. And then I remind them that we all agreed to it, and here's under the circumstances that we agreed to it. But hey, life happens and things change constantly. So now we have new information, and it's my job when you're running product to this is how the world has changed, guys. Are we all still on board? Do we need to take in new information and consider new things, right? Most CEOs that I've worked with inside of 3 weeks. Oh, I get it. I get why you're here. I was at a startup company recently, a healthcare startup, and we had a chief science officer, and they were like, I don't understand why we're bringing in a head of product. And I was there for 3 weeks, and he called me up, and he goes, I know why you're here now. I apologize for everything I said. You didn't even hear it. I apologize. I understand why you're here, because we really need someone to kind of tie everything together. Focusing on the actual technology is massive. I hand it to every engineer on the planet for handling that. But someone has to balance the needs of the technology, the engineering, like what can physically be done. Someone has to balance the needs of the company. If we don't make money, we're not a company. And someone has to balance the needs of the customer. I'm not paying for anything that I can't get value out of. Someone has to have their eye on all three of those things at all times. Hence the product manager. I love that. If you're the type of person that I like having my hand in everything, it's why I enjoy some startups. Like when you can see and have your hand in everything and influence it all, that's a lot of fun. Builder, fixer, whatever term you want to use for it. If you're that kind of personality, product management is certainly for you.
With everything going on and all those different moving parts, how do you stay on top of it all? I mean, there's a huge range in capabilities and experience there. How do you connect with everybody and encourage them, if you will?
Yeah, it's that's a great question. When you're trying to take a bunch of disparate personalities, and it's not that everybody's mean people, not, but you have a bunch of people that are just motivated by different things. You need to have something in common that everybody can key on. I call it the North Star. People will use different terms for it. But when everyone comes to work, nobody comes to work to do a bad job. They really don't. But I need to know what I'm working towards. And as a company, we're all here. We should be working towards the same thing. So it's always worked well for me that if I can get everybody focused on that end goal or the North Star, what we're trying to do, it's a little bit easier because now we have something in common. We can at least all agree that, yes, we're all trying to achieve that. We may all have different opinions as to how we may achieve that. But at least if we can agree on that end point, it makes the conversations a lot easier. And it's also how you handle conversations. I wish there was a framework where if you just followed it, everything would turn out right in the end. We're human beings. We are imperfect, emotionally, not logically driven people. If you can understand that and start applying that in how you deal with people, things really smooth out. One of the things I lucked out is they said, well, you can talk to anyone. You're a bit of a chameleon, and you can connect with people at their level no matter where they are. And that's one of the skills. And it is a skill. You're not born with this. It's a skill over time. But I would tell any product manager, if you can cultivate that skill, your life will be so much easier. Logically, it's really hard to argue with people. Pick any political argument. And you can literally argue both sides in some areas from a place of logic. And yet you've got people bashing each other constantly. So it's like if you can at least find that one thing, and in product it should be the North Star, that we all agree that's the result we want. Okay, I would love to hear everybody's opinions from your areas on how we can get there.
What does a North Star mean for you? Give me an example of, have you worked in a role where maybe there wasn't a North Star and it was your job to help pull everybody together and rally them towards that vision?
Sure, yeah. If there isn't a North Star and you're in product, you make one. You do. You have to translate the vision into something that's tangible. So a North Star is something tangible. Visions are not always tangible. I think it's one of the problems we have with visions. I want to be, something, the autonomous supermarket. I don't need a person to ever work in there. Great. We probably won't see that in my lifetime or my kid's lifetime or maybe even the grandkid's lifetime. So when I come in on Monday, what do I change? What am I supposed to work towards to get us to that vision? When the vision is so lofty, it's kind of crazy. Nobody can connect to that. They say that's nice, they forget it, they go back to doing the same thing. So in product, you have to look at that and say, well, what's a tangible North Star? What's a milestone that I can get that is quantifiable, right? So not just we're going to launch a product, but North Star should be we're going to launch this product and have X amount of customers in year one making this much money. That's a North Star. Now I say, okay, we know how much we have to make. I know how many customers I have to get. So my marketing groups and product marketers working with us can be like, okay, now I have in my mind the scope of what I need to do. And the technologists say, now I have the scope in my mind of what I need to do to support X amount of users coming on in the first year. If you don't have like a quantifiable North Star, you simply create one. And the way you create anything is you make it up based on your gut, right? Which is your subconscious doing all its calculations. It's your own little AI. And you make one up, and then you let everybody beat the heck out of it. And then you say, okay, well, what would you put? It's another way you can work with everybody, and everybody has their input. And when you all can agree that this makes sense for everybody, now we all have a North Star. Everyone gave data, so I automatically kind of have your buy-in. Now we're working towards it. It gets rid of a lot of the weird conversations of, I had no idea you were building this thing, which we've all heard. I had no idea where this was. You guys go in stealth mode, and I never see anything from you. That sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point, and kind of going back to the comment about vision. Vision I think can be interpreted a lot of different ways, and you know we're all coming at life through different lenses, and you might read a vision and see something that's blue, and be working towards that, and somebody else might look at that vision and say, well, I think that's red, and I move this way. I think what I'm getting out of this is your North Star is really concrete and tangible and measurable. I like the idea of creating your own sense of what that North Star is. Pulling. We talk about throwing all the Legos down on the table and then seeing what we have in front of us and starting to create the plan and what that's going to look like. With something like this, I think it's tough, and I've seen a lot of companies go out and they start the journey based on committee, and they almost can't even get going because all of these ideas are great and all of these lenses they're different. And when you take the reins as a product manager and you take those inputs and you create an initial vision and say, okay, here's where I think we go, now tear it apart, now give the feedback, you're now putting up rails. It's not this huge thing that could go nowhere or everywhere. Do I have that right, or am I way off?
I love what you said there. You're talking about putting up rails. That's huge. Yeah. One of the things we always talk about, especially in startups, but in product, like you've got to be comfortable working in the gray area. In product marketing, any of that, it is gray. You're building 0 to 1 is you're taking like white space or the gray and you're trying to make something tangible out of it. The gray being, a giant 5,000 person company where everybody has their own jobs and opinions, and maybe it matters and maybe it doesn't to what you're trying to build and sort. But you need to be able to put up guardrails when you're building anything to be able to kind of drive things home. Did a lot of research when I was creating product development processes on how does Apple do it. They put out a beautiful new iPhone, in my opinion, every single year. It's pretty cool. They obviously have something down. They can't be going through a really ugly, giant, old school waterfall practice to do that, right? Where they're just giving people, you have to do this, you have to do that. So it's interesting. They have the concept of guardrails, which I kind of stole from them. And I'm like, well, this is great. And the idea is, you can have all these people working and everybody's going to do their own thing. But if I can put guardrails up to say, look, don't go beyond this, don't go beyond that. If you do, that's when all the leadership will get involved. So I used to tell my teams, I said, you do you. You are way closer to this than I am. I hired you because you're really good and I think you're great. Go get them. If I'm here to kind of destroy your roadblocks, right? But until then, drive forward and do what you can do. And they're going through the whole company, and you're going through all the functions, and you're making this thing work, and all the functions have their own opinions and things they need. I worked at a company where it took 6 months practically to get a SKU created. Now, if anyone's ever created a SKU, it's you put a number down towards a piece or a part or a product, and then that's just the unique identifier of your product. But you get established companies sometimes, and they're like, yeah, but it has to go through so many checks and balances, and you look back and you're like, these are things that happened, it's the old monkey and the ladder parable, right? Like when they keep hitting a monkey with the water when he goes up to get a banana, they remove the monkey they hit with the water, and everybody, eventually, you've removed all the monkeys that saw what happened, and now when a monkey goes up to get the banana, no one knows why, but they all jump on him and rip him down the ladder. There's so much of that in larger organizations, and you kind of have to beat through that when you're in product. You have to fight that a lot. I've fought that a lot as my customers' problems. I've had customers come to me and say, I need you to add this button so we can print. And I said, I have an ancient code base myself. It's going to cost me $425,000, more or less, to be able to build this. And I remember talking to this client, and they are a large, global, multinational, may or may not have something to do with oil. And they were great people, but I remember talking with them, and they're like, we have to do this. And I had like 15 people from their global HR organization on. And I said, well, tell me why you need this. Well, we have this form. And it's just going to take a lot for us to never need this form. And we all agree it's dumb. But for us to not use this form as part of our process, we have to go, we don't even know how to do it internally. And so we had to say, well, obviously I can't fix a problem like that, right? And they were like, yeah, it's a good point. I get what we're asking you now. It feels bad. I'm like, well, maybe there's another way we can kind of fix this, right? And it's a dialogue, and you kind of talk it through. The old school product manager who didn't know any better might have said, like, okay, I guess I'll add that to my backlog, and here's $400,000, which means I'll do this one thing for you, and we can't build anything new this month or year. When you have legacy software sometimes and you're delivering twice a year, it matters. Every kind of open space on your roadmap matters for delivery. So, sorry, we would tangent
a little bit. I think we could head down this path for quite some time. But I think a lot of companies are trying to shed legacy code base, and they're looking at AI and machine learning and how quickly things seem like they can move. And they're looking at other aspects of the business and saying, why can't we move this quickly? Why can't we move like that? So we could go, I guess, for a long time on that. I think what would be interesting is looking at in coming in. So you've come into sizable organizations and spun up product management from very little. What are some of the obstacles for somebody coming in, what you've seen as a seasoned person? What are some obstacles that you've seen trying to spin that up from the ground up when there isn't a culture of it?
Yeah, and you're trying to move. You'll hear a lot of people say, we want to become a product-led organization, right?
Yeah.
I think the main thing has to be senior leadership, so your ELT, anyone with a C or SVP in their title, they all have to collectively have buy-in, at least the majority. If they don't, it's almost for naught, right? If they do have buy-in, you have things like a chief product officer that reports directly into a commercial or a CEO, not a product officer that reports to the technologist. Because when push comes to shove, quite often the CTO is like, well, we're going to do what the engineering team needs, which might not be the best thing for the product.
Right.
And I think having buy-in from the senior leadership team, realizing the need for it, because you hate to say it, then you can come down and other people that have questions, you're like, the entire executive leadership team understands this and is behind this. And not just understands it, but is willing to support, resource it properly, and so on. So having product as its own entity, in my opinion, is pretty important.
So I would imagine that if you're brought in as maybe a new product manager, that would already be in place, right? Wouldn't you just assume that if they've decided to hire somebody to fill that role, then
it depends.
The team would all be rowing in the same direction?
It depends. You would hope so. but not always. And everybody has different opinions and perspectives on what product management is. There's lots of different models. I'm not a huge fan of like strict frameworks. I worked at a company where it was agile and they were using Scrum, and it was like fundamentalist Scrum. You must have no more than 3 engineers in your team. You must have this. I mean, like, that's kind of ridiculous, right?
Isn't that the magic of it, though? Is it adhering to the rules, right?
It's not. I mean, it's easy. And I mean, look, Scrum was created by consultants to show, throughput. Not so much we're hitting outcomes. I'm a product manager. I always say this. I could care less if your software is powered by the wailing souls of the damned. I literally don't care. If it does what we need it to do, and the customers have it doing what they need it to do and it solves their problem, do we care? I don't care if the ATM is a gremlin taking money and sticking it through the slot. To me, it literally doesn't matter. I'm not, ooh, great, you have lots of incredible, it's AI powered. It doesn't matter. Do I get my money out when I put my card in? So when you take that kind of approach, engineers I've worked with love it because they're like, well, thankfully, now I can get creative. Like in product, our job is like, here's what we need to do and why we need to do it. How? You turn to your technologists and say, I am ecstatic to find out how you plan on solving this one. Good engineers will be like, all right, let's go talk about it. Like I've asked the impossible just to do it with people, and they look at me and they're like, ugh, all right, well, we'll have a meeting on it. Let's see if we can do it. That's what you want in your engineer. Yeah. And that's one of the fun, to me, parts of product management.
Having worked in life sciences, it seems kind of like a gunslinger approach. Like they would chafe against that a little bit. Like we have to deal with regulatory, and we have to deal with overseeing bodies, and how would you reconcile that?
Life sciences is interesting. It's very much. I interviewed at one life science company. My interview was by the CTO at the time. He's like, "How would you do Agile Scrum for a hardware company with FDA regulation?" And I looked at him and I said, well, you wouldn't. Next question, right? There's very much it must be this way or it must be that way. And I think a lot of it is life science companies are dealing so much with, we're trying not to kill people, we're trying to heal people. At its core, that's what we're always trying to do. As a product manager, that's always in my mind, even if it's just software. I've worked at companies where something bad has happened, and it was our products that were down the line. Now, a lot of it was because the product was misused. So it wasn't like the product failed, right? It was the person using it misused. It was national news, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, as a product person, I'm like, how should I have prevented that? Should we have done something different to prevent it? In this case, there was no way you could have, because the idea was we'll just override. That's a healthcare and life sciences issue. Just override everything. So you can put every lock in the world in place, but if you're giving the keys out to anyone that asks for them, what good is it, right? You hope everything is just another little deterrent to get someone to stop for a second and maybe question. But when you're trying to build in life sciences, there's a bit, especially when AI is involved, there's a bit of, if it's not 100%, it's worthless. Right? Oh, wow. And from a product perspective, we're like, look, if you've got, a job to be done and I can get you 90% down the road, there's definitely value in that. Even data entry. If I can handle accurately, 95% accurate, 80% of your data entry, how is that not valuable? Human data entry hovers around 85% accuracy. The best humans, about 85. Even entry-level machine learning, at one of mine, we were up at 96 at one point. So it's doable, right? It's just that I think we have the Hollywood expectations around AI, and a lot of people have really unrealistic expectations about what software and AI and machine learning and stuff like that can actually do. And it's like, if this product isn't $1 and giving me 100% accuracy, it's worthless to me. So you're kind of battling that from a marketing perspective, right? We've got this, you put all this effort in to kind of bring something to market to say, we're trying to make your lives better, nurses, CNAs. Anyone, we're trying to make your life better here. People that are really harried get it. So a lot of people on the line understand it. The challenge becomes your user is not always your buyer. Often your user is not your buyer. So what I'm selling to the buyer is very different than the prospects that I'm selling to the actual user. Users may love it, may legitimately help them. But from a buyer perspective, if I'm not saving X, I don't see the value in it per se. So in life sciences, in my opinion, life sciences specifically, I see a massive disconnect there between buyer and user. That as a product manager, it's one of the forefront things in our mind. Like, I have to talk to all these different levels, and everybody in the healthcare continuum is dealing with something different. And how do I make sure that my product addresses every single level? And it's hard. You're almost doubling the work in some areas.
Yeah, I think what we see a ton of, and you make a really good point there, is you have a founder, you have somebody who spun up a company, and the moment you make the step, it's a process, but the moment you make the step from user, a surgeon or clinician or bench scientist or engineer, the moment you take that step into entrepreneurship, you're then the business person. Now, you still have all of that experience, you still have all of that inside you, but you're coming at these things from a completely different perspective. You've got different motivators, you've got different drivers and things that are influencing your decisions and ways that you have to look at making those choices. And you bringing it back to your point, you're really not your customer anymore. You're not the buyer. You started out as the person with the problem and you went to solve it. But there are different dynamics at play now.
Well, problems evolve. Times change. So one of the challenges is, it worked with enough doctors that wanted to become entrepreneurs. I get it. It's very, very, very hard life to be a doctor. And a lot of them that I've dealt with are like, yeah. And then I realize, kind of like me, I can affect more. Like, I could do something for myself, but if I can start a company, I can affect all these other doctors that are my friends. Like, they're the ones commiserating with me. But one of the challenges is the problems, I had in the last 20 years of being a doctor might not be the problems that new doctors coming in are experiencing today. So this is where product also comes in and is pretty important. And it's one of the reasons I actually enjoy bouncing industries. So I've worked in healthcare a lot, but I've also worked in human capital management and fintech. And one of the nice things about product management is if you're good at it, even okay at it, your skills are transferable almost anywhere because you're coming with the idea of, I don't really know anything, right? Most geniuses are geniuses because they ask a lot of questions. They don't know everything. So you're coming in and you're trying to learn everything. But you're learning what today is. What are the problems right now, today, in 2024 in June? Not, back in the 90s or back in the early aughts, we had all these issues. And I'm like, yeah, well, they may be different now. So you have a lot of assumed knowledge that is not used, which is good. But it's great to have, a doctor as your CEO to be like, well, here's how it's been for the last 20 years. Because that needs to fill in the knowledge gap that I have. I haven't been a doctor for 20 years. I'm not quite sure what really went on. But it makes me a lot easier to tie that story together of, well, here's what they're seeing today. Here's where it came from. And here's where it's going. And in product, I'm always thinking today and 5-10 years down the line. What's coming down? Because none of us can build anything in a couple of days, right? Even a couple of weeks. I need to constantly be thinking to where are things going in the future? And I find that helps me, at least.
So I was on a call with a team, a client the other day, and the consensus in the group is, even on small changes, it's a hard sell, to
the CEO.
To that CEO. Yeah. And you really have to convince him of it. And I wonder how you sort of reconcile managing new market needs, and demands, and saying, okay, that device you created 20 years ago, the market's evolved. There are new challenges. And people will say, well, there are always going to be the same issues and the same concerns. But they expand, and there are new challenges. So how do you manage leadership who maybe is that initial founder, as a product manager? How do you approach them with new directions and maybe driving innovation and new development?
Yeah. So I heard something one time from a CEO of a large blue chip company one time. She didn't say it to me, but I thought it was brilliant because someone told her this. They said, look, you can win in private or lose in public. I've never forgot that. And so thinking about the scenario you just gave in the situation, in that position, and I did this once or twice, It's a private conversation with that CEO over lunch or something to be like, can we just connect for an hour? And then have kind of a candid conversation of, tell me where your head is. I want to bring you new things. Do you want to innovate? Say they've turned down a few things and they're real. I feel like I always have to hard sell this to you. What am I getting wrong? Where is your head? I'm trying to figure out what you're thinking. You know things I don't. You see things I don't. You started this company. Tell me what you're thinking. And I've never had a person not tell me what they were thinking. To be able to then say, okay, you're afraid that the company's a little more fragile. And he knows that better than I do as a product leader. Like, I understand the P&L and I have to track all that and responsible for it. But at the end of the day, he's seeing and talking to people that I'm not. He may, and weight of the world on the shoulders when you're a CEO. I don't think we appreciate that as much. I've seen very good people just get kind of crushed by that. And at the end of the day, if he can be honest with me and tell me, like, look, there's things you don't know that are going on, but we're a little more fragile now, so I'm less risk averse right now. I really just want to keep things going. I can then tailor what I'm saying to, okay, I still want to build this new thing, but now let me explain to you why we need this. So if we're fragile where we are now, this could open up a new market for us to get into that will kind of hedge bets against here. And that's where I'm thinking. And even if he's like, yeah, I don't like that at all, he understands how I'm thinking. One of the things I always like to show people are levers. I always say levers. I said, look, let me come to you and say, here's everything I know. Here are the levers to pull. We could build this and make this much money, I think, because I learned this. I'll tell you everything. You're the CEO. You tell me what lever to pull. You want to build it now? Move forward with it. Take a little bit of the the belly of the fish, and we may take a hit in the short term, only to have the hockey stick work in our favor in the longer term. Or do we need to keep things even today? And I'll respect either way. But let me show you where my thinking was, how I arrived at this, and then you help me choose. I'll tell you what my opinion is. But as a CEO, you get to pull the two. I've never had that not work. I never, at least with rational human beings, right? Yes, there are absolute, CEO is certainly sometimes the rock star role. But rock stars are, yes, everybody loves you and you're great, or you're drunk destroying hotel rooms in an absolute mess. So the rock star parable they talk about in business can certainly go both ways, and you hope you get the former.
Yeah, that's funny. You made a couple of points there, and it's a little challenging to pick one. So you talk about really communication, like getting their ear and talking to them. I think it's been a little bit more challenging the last 4 or 5 years for people to, walk down the hall and knock on a door, send an email, and even if it wasn't a physical versus virtual conversation, maybe even just getting up the courage to go to the head team and say, look, I want to have a conversation. So I think you could almost have an entire conversation about that.
And how to have a conversation,
but something,
sure.
Yeah, something I'm interested in is, like, how do you gauge risk adversity? How do you tell? I was in a situation where I was sold a bill of goods. I was told I want to be innovative. I want to drive things to the extreme, and we all know that even when people say that, they don't always mean they want to go that far. A lot of it is the feeling of being that type of person who believes in that is great, but the reality is they're almost never that excited. They're not that level. How do you practically, do you think, gauge what their appetite for innovation, for change, for doing something kind of crazy? Is there some kind of barometer? Is there some kind of way that you can, aside from sitting down with them over lunch? I mean, how do you gauge that?
This will not be the sexiest answer. Look at the balance sheet. It's easy to say, I'll take risk. We're very risk here. We're transforming. We want to take a lot of risk. We're okay taking a hit for a couple of quarters. And we know we're going to make millions after. This is the right way to go. All companies in our lovely country here are dealing with two things. I have to build to the future, the innovation that we're talking about. And I have to survive today. That's the second, and probably the more important thing. And especially when you're in leadership and CEO, you're getting hammered on the survive today. We are a quarterly nation. Everything we do has to be, can we hit this on the quarter? Unfortunately, for product, we also get looked at as like, well, what can you build to have us make money this quarter? There's literally nothing. There's nothing we can do that's automatically going to have us make a ton of money this quarter. Like, you can't do it. We have to be thinking in the future. So naturally, we're very risk non-averse in product. We're like, oh, you give me 3 years in stealth mode and I will create something to teleport us to Japan. All right? Not so much when you're trying to balance the day-to-day. So the balance sheet, if the company is doing well, maybe not growing 15% year over year, but if the company's doing well, I find people tend to be a little more open. It's when you're not doing well, though, that you need to be open to risk, because it's like, look, I could grind this thing into the ground slowly, and you can have very comfortable jobs for many years doing that, right? That's just, we're fighting human nature here a little bit. But yeah, if the company's doing well, but they still want to transform, and that was the situation I was part of, that's ideal, because it's real easy. Right? They're like, hey, look, we're one of a few companies on the planet that do what we do. We're in healthcare. There's a massive need for our entire portfolio. We're going to be okay. That at least gets momentum. So if you can get that momentum, if you're transforming, you're trying to build something new or something kind of crazy to innovate, it's a little bit easier. I had to innovate something on a real short timeline once for a very large company, building it for another very, very large company that we all know the names of. And their risk aversion was, yeah, look, we just got to get this done because it's a reputation. It's kind of a marquee issue for us, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. And that was where, this is where product is fun. I was able to say, okay, I can do that, but it's my way. In other words, I can't do it the way you guys always do it. We're going to have to be different. Here are the resources I need. Trust me. They trusted me. I got very lucky. They didn't have any reason to, but they were like, okay, we like what you're saying. You've laid out what you want to do and the possibility of it. That makes sense. So doing your pre-work matters. Like, I didn't just come out there and say, trust me, I'm Jim. I'll set you straight. But I came and said, look, here's the plan. Here are the levers we could pull. Here are the things we absolutely have to get done. Here are the things we might not need to get done. But we're like 95% confident, and that's the engineers talking, not me, that we can get this done in the 9 months we need to. Okay, good enough. We'll help you out. We got a nice designation. Everybody left us alone. And of course it worked, right? But pre-work helped that a lot. So when you're talking to leadership about stuff, pre-work helps. Being able to walk in, and I'm a big show, don't tell. Like, I think people fail. Like, just write a few things down. If you had like 3 slides to just show things, that's enough to be like, huh, this works. My uncle was CEO Cook's Ham, and he went into Conagra, which puts most of the food on your supermarket tables, and he walked in, and everybody from Nabisco and everyone was there, and they all had these giant, thick manuals of, here's our company in the business. He walked in with 3 slides. I'll never forget the story, and he sat in front of everyone, he says, you all have no idea how we make money. And everyone around Conagra is like, yeah, we have no idea. He goes, okay, here's how we make money. We sell ham. And here's how we get the ham, and and it was 1 slide, very basic. Here's where it's going for demand, and here's how we plan to sell in the next 3 years. He was in and out in like 15 minutes. And of course, as he's walking out, and they're like, that was great, thank you. Everyone else sitting down, the Nabisco guy with the book this thick is glaring at him. Because now he's got to follow that, and he's got this book, and he's not showing anything. He's going to talk them through all this paper. So just like we learn in school, it's always kind of show, don't tell. Yeah. I've never not had a leader not sit and look at a slide I put up for him if I said I have 1 slide to show you everything, right? Yeah. If you can learn to kind of condense a lot of your communication down, it'll be, if a person won't read or watch that, go find another job at that stage.
Yeah.
You're not really dealing with someone that you're going to win no matter what secret you may have.
Yeah, exactly. And I always, looking at, managing teams, it's always easier if you are presented with, the high level thinking and the high level story.
Absolutely.
I think people try to overcomplicate the message. And, when you're dealing with somebody at that level, they're smart, they're fast, but that doesn't mean they need 60 slides and a deep dive. They need that They want to know that you know it. They want to be able to trust you and have you do it. And it does take time. It takes time
Sure.
to build up a relationship and reputation to do that. But I think one of your end goals is to build that trust and the reputation so that you can sit down with 2 or 3 slides and say, look, here's the story, here's the data in a nutshell, and not go through volumes. I mean, who wants to do that? Nobody.
No one. Honestly, this is why I love my product marketers. If you look at when the the MacBook Air was introduced, it was one image. I never forgot it. You probably have. It was a laptop sliding into a manila envelope. That one image told everybody everything they needed to know. So I always use that as the barometer. I once had to break down a process on, it was at the company, how a SKU was created. And it was this giant monster spreadsheet. And what I did was I shrunk it down so it would fit on one slide. You literally couldn't see anything but all these lines going through. It looked like a semiconductor. And this was how to get a SKU across 6 different orgs. And I put it up on the wall. I said, hey, here's how we create a SKU today. And that's all I needed to do. And everyone was like, oh, my goodness. And they could tell, I'm like, I can't even read it. It's zoomed out so much. I said, yes. And instantly everybody understood the problem. And that's kind of all you needed to say. So those moments are rare. But being able to simplify, as you say, is paramount. You know, if you're pitching a new company, it's a 7-slide deck, if that, right? I should know all the basics in that many slides. And I think we see too many 45, 50, 60, 70 slide PowerPoints where you can't even email them because, you know, it's a 70 meg file. So now you have to put it up, and nobody reads through those either.
No.
When you're a leader,
yeah.
It's like you need to distill the information. If you can tell me what I need to know to make a decision or pull the lever, in Jim Dembkoski speak, thank you. That's great. And you know, now you have that cachet that you've talked about where I'm going to start taking you seriously. I know as a product leader now, or a product manager, or anyone in product, that you know what you're doing. And you know what I'm dealing with. And that's kind of when it comes to communication, like, do you know what the other person is dealing with? And if you can get that across, like, I know what's important to you, those conversations are wonderful. It's when people don't have that connection. You don't build rapport, and then, yeah, the conversations are very transactional. Can I do this? No. Okay, I guess I'll go back to the drawing board, right? So
yeah. So it's people management, it's sales, it's a little bit of everything. So tell me, looking back on the last 10 or 15 years of your career, what do you wish you knew? Like time travel for me. You're going back to talk to your younger self. Give me one, like, avoid this at all costs. You know, in product management.
Yeah. So you're dealing in product management with a lot of different people. You've got to look at yourself as the one person who can talk to anybody and deal with it. Because if not, you're not getting the product built right. And guess what? It's your fault. That's it. It's your fault. You are the ultimate in accountability. When I was early on in my first product role job, I remember my CEO told me, Jim, you're good at the carrot. You need to learn how to wield a stick. I took that to mean be kind of hard. And I did it once in a meeting, and I made a guy so upset he was crying. I felt sick to my stomach for days. The CEO calls me on the ride home and he's laughing. He's like, what happened? He just came in and told me I should fire you, and he doesn't want to work with you, and he'll never even sit next to you. And I'm like, and we were at a startup company working 90 hours a week, all of us. It was seasonal. Everybody's stress was through the roof. And I just took the stick to mean be commanding and tell them what to do and everything. And I realize now, of course, that the stick doesn't mean that at all. It just means being able to hold people accountable and firm accountable. Not like, oh, that's okay, I guess we'll launch next week. Or no, there's accountability. But you can always do that and still be nice, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest things. Now, you know, when people tell me about they have really difficult conversations with CEOs and customers, and I say, I honestly don't know what that's like. It's hard to find stories of that now, because when I realized that eventually, and I wish I had learned it a lot earlier, but when I realized that, you can kind of talk to anybody if you realize you're trying to, when I'm product, I'm trying to talk to you, here's how what I'm doing can help you. You're in finance. Yeah, well, we need your help in figuring out how to price this product because guess what? We need to make more money, and we get paid by working here because we make more money as a company. And I don't know of anyone that doesn't understand that. And they're like, this is great. Oh my God, you're going to make our books look wonderful. And the quality team. And here's why we're going to start building things a little differently. So when you have your quality management system, which if you're in healthcare building anything regulatory, you must have, they're like, oh, this is so much easier. This is going to really help us. Thank you for helping us with the quality management system, and so on and so forth. So, you need to have the carrot. You need to have the stick. This is called influence. It's the one thing we talk about in product is you basically are a matrixed leader, and everyone reports into you, but they don't, and you can't fire anybody or hold them accountable other than I need to hold you accountable. So there's a way to do that, though, and it just takes time to learn, right? I wish I had learned that earlier in my career because I would have saved so much time and heartache. And then I look at that as being saving time equals I could have launched the product earlier. Could have made more money. We could have iterated on it faster. It could have had more, on the MVP. That could have been more on day one. That's kind of where your head ends up going. But that's a big one to understand that as a product person, you're kind of responsible for that product and you're ultimately accountable. But you're also not accountable to do all the work. You're accountable to make sure everybody gets the stuff done they need to and kind of help bring it through. But ultimately, you're not. You've got to be ultimately accountable, and the buck stops here. And if you can take that as your personality, where no, this is me, and the buck stops here, life is much better. I did not do that my first time around.
What are some things that you've learned about holding people accountable, but also still being able to work with them? Not so they end up crying.
Yeah, well, a lot of it is, and I've learned this. I've been very fortunate to have lots of great leaders I've worked for. And just like all other good leaders, you simply pick up little bits and pieces of all the other leaders around. And one of them I learned from one of my commercial officer leaders was just ask a lot of questions around when can I expect that? If you tell me it takes you 4 weeks and that's what it is, that's great. So in 4 weeks, we'll expect that. And, is that okay? Yes. Great. So now if 4 weeks comes around and it's not there, it's almost self-explanatory to people when you're like, okay, but you said it would be here. And now it's not here. And that was what you said, it took 4 weeks. Okay, we had things come up that were problems. Of course you did. That's life. How do we not get here next time? There's going to be mistakes. You're never going to hold people accountable all the time. But you say, how are we going to not do this next time? In other words, should we check in every week? You tell me, though. I don't want to, because, look, the person already feels bad they didn't deliver. I've yet to meet a person that doesn't deliver and feels fine about it, right? Those are people that's what we have riffs for. That's not the kind of person you ever want working with you, right?
Yeah.
The really good people feel horrible about it. They're usually telling you ahead of time. But look, life happens and things happen, and so much in business happens that we aren't aware of. It's why we get paid to do this, and it's not easy. And you can't just read a book and get things done.
Yeah. So if I can't, sorry, I'm going to jump in.
Yeah.
So you it sounds like what you do is you include them in part of that planning and forecasting process.
100%.
So you have them contribute. You don't just tell them, which can be challenging if you're given a directive. We have to hit this milestone, and we have to hit this launch date, and then you put together a plan, work back plan, or whatever, and then you go to team members and say you have to hit this date. So I think having them be part of the conversation and the planning for that scheduling, but then.
Yeah.
If you've included them, I think it becomes easier to manage if they don't hit the milestone or they don't hit the goal, and also working with them to find a solution so that working through whatever popped up. If we run into that again, what are some solutions so that we don't hit that again?
That's the fun part. Right? I mean, that's kind of the fun part. It's all the stuff you don't expect that kind of pops up and you're like, ooh. But I like what you said to start that. It's like, so here's the thing. I don't think it's good anywhere to come out and say, we all have to hit this start date and go to people and tell them. I don't like to be told what to do. My 6-year-old does that. I don't like when she does that to me. Nobody likes to be told what to do. It's also, it's one of the challenges in product management. If someone comes and says, you need to build something and have it out by this date. Okay, why? That's the first thing you ask anyone. Never accept that. Ever. Why? Because you're building something that's never been there. And now it's like saying I grow corn and I need to have it all ready on this date. Okay, you can tell me what the weather's going to be and the soil toxicity and all that fun stuff. So a lot of it is why. And then you need to be able to go to the teams and say, we have been challenged to get it by this date. Can you do that? Because look, in the beginning is when we find out that like this is physically impossible to do. And that has happened. I've been part of it. And it's my job to go back and tell the powers that be, this is physically impossible to do with what we have. But in my lever world, I need an extra $2 million of resources. Whoa, I don't have that. Okay, how important is it gets out? I guess it's not that important. That's usually how these conversations go. Like, people aren't dictators. CEOs got there, usually, because they're really good at what they do, and they just want the information. And they're making decisions based on the info they have. It is not my job to be a yes person. It is my job to be like you're out of your mind. Let me show you why. And they're like, oh, boy. All right, I'm glad you told me this, Jim. I honestly had no idea about that. So I think you need to challenge things, and you can challenge anything in a good way. But as a product manager, you show your thinking by challenging things sometimes like that. If it, you can't just go to people and say, I was told to do this and to do that. I mean, that's not good. Eventually, we can just have computer software do that. I will tell it what to do, and it will work down the line. We need thinking people. So you have to be able to challenge those things. And they are hard conversations.
It's refreshing to hear because we don't always get to work, maybe not in a perfect situation, but with, I hate to even say reasonable people. I've been in conversations where leadership will cut a budget, like a project budget, down to 10 or 20%. But then they triple the goal or the expectation for the output. And you're just left sitting there wondering, what are we going to do now? And it feels unreasonable. And we all do love a challenge. We like to figure out, is it okay? Is it just has it been so expensive because that's how we've always done it? Are there new things we can try? But sometimes the expectations are a little bananas. So I think that's an interesting point.
And that's why you question them. Like, you can question anything. I've never met anyone that got fired by asking a question. And if you did, you dodged a bullet. Go talk to a lawyer. And it's okay to ask, we have this. In fact, most CEOs would probably love to tell you if you asked. To be like, well, I'll tell you, what are you dealing with? Tell me exactly why you need all of this way. I don't even know if it can physically be done, but tell me why. And again, it's the conversation thing. If you want product to be taken seriously in a company, ask those questions. If you don't, just do what people tell you to do blindly and don't kind of challenge. And not challenge in a bad way, but I mean, it's okay to ask the why. And look, you're in product. I can't build anything if I don't know the why, because I'm not an automaton. I need to know why we're doing something, because I need to know what I have to uncover that nobody else has probably thought about in addition to this. You can't just go forward with something and then launch it and things fail. I never had a major failure launch that I was involved in because we did a lot of pre-work. And I always hear about people like, oh, we launched this, it completely failed. And I always ask, how? Did you ask why you were doing it? Well, no, we were told we had to. But we never found out what was the impetus? I mean, what if the impetus was he just doesn't like some person and he wants to make them work extra? Then you say, okay, great. Let's give that person another job that they hate then and save the rest of the company. There's always an answer to every problem, but you got to ask why. 99% of it is finding out the why.
At every level. When I first started the agency, I worked with a company that they had a solution to green up power plants. They had a chemical application and some filtration system, and it reduced NOx emissions like 90%. It was crazy, and it's a green company. And this is 20 years ago now. And in proposing a new brand, we presented it's kind of passé now, but it was a green and gray color palette, and his brand colors were red and black, fire and smoke and pollution. And so he pushed back. He pushed back a long time and hard. And finally, he was exasperated. We were exasperated. Why? Why do you feel so strongly about this? And he walked us outside to the front of the building, and there was his black and red Harley. and he said, my logo looks really good with this Harley. And we're like, that's the reason you're making this decision right now. So anyway, he then realized how ridiculous the position he was taking was, like what he was letting drive, and things became much easier. But it's not just the tough questions asking the why. Sometimes people get really bananas over the smallest things, and when you really get to the root of it,
yeah. Well, it's the whole, when you realize, I'm on an island when I say this. People look at me like I got 10 heads. When you realize we are emotional creatures, not always logical creatures, and you've got to talk to people on an emotional level like that. That's an emotional decision he made. I love this Harley. I like the way I look on it and feel. I want everyone to have this awesome feeling. That's why I'll make my logo red and black. But other people, we also make the mistake as humans. Not everybody thinks the way we do. So that's why we say, well, if we just do everything logically, everything should work out, because everybody thinks logically. And the truth of the matter is, emotion trumps logic. Smart people do stupid stuff all the time. I'm usually leading the charge. But, when you're talking to people, and to me, that's the secret kind of to communication, is how do I diplomatically find out, do you have a red and black Harley? What's your red and black Harley? That's a great one. Maybe I'll use that in the future. Like, tell me you don't have a car out there with these two colors on it.
Yeah. I love that story. I hate to use it in the context of brand building, but it's completely 100%. So I think that you make a good point, and we'll probably wrap up here in a minute. But the point that we, our leadership team, our founders, the people building product, we're engineers and scientists, sometimes surgeons, very critical, analytical, detailed, thinkers, rational, very rational, if this, then that, and what the mistake that's made is layering that onto your community or your audience, if you will, to bring it kind of full circle for me. In the programs that we do. There's a component. It's not a huge component, but it's a critical component in building a brand, building a personal brand, in messaging and positioning, that we address and we speak to the things that matter to these people as human beings, not as machines, not faceless businesses and organizations. Because no matter how much of a huge company has taken over a healthcare system, you're still selling into people, and you need to speak to them at that level. So whether you're in product, you're building the product, you're marketing the product, we have to take into account that it's about the people.
Well put. You made me think of just a short story. I remember someone showing up and they're like, we work for the big company. And they're like, well, that's what the company does. There's no such thing as a company doesn't have a brain. It's like, we're the company. And he had said, he goes, I sit back and I'm this company. I don't think that way. Don't blame it on this nameless, faceless corporation. It is made up of people like us, right? Like, I can fix this. I can change the way the company acts and thinks. Especially in healthcare and life sciences, that is pretty prevalent. It's a lot of like the corporation. But when the corporation is made up of people, and everyone is driven by different things. We all have different intrinsic motivators. You talk a lot about, we deal with very rational people. I mean, I've dealt with MIT, brilliant scientists, PhDs, and everything, wonderful people. And, the one common thing is they're all still human. And just asking someone, well, what's important to you? What's important to me is the data is perfect. Great. I know how to deal with you now. You care about the data, and I will show you how I achieve golden data when I'm building my training sets and so on and so forth, right? But just talking to people and finding out what's important to them, every single scientist has stuff that's important to them, some aspect. CEOs especially have things that are very important to them. Most people love to talk about that, and they actually really appreciate when they're asked. Because it's, what drives you? You're telling me something about you. And in product, at least, I now know how to get the most and best out of everybody. I know how to navigate these waters better.
So thanks for hopping on with me today, Jim.
Anytime. Always a pleasure.
So if you're a life science leader or product manager and you have an interesting story you'd like to share, reach out to me on LinkedIn and we'll connect. If you're interested in learning some other lessons in marketing for life sciences or in avoiding some of the big mistakes, I cover a lot of that in my LinkedIn newsletter. So I'll drop the links to those in the description below. That's it. That's the end.